Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Morty and Glory video. Today guys, we are going to be taking a look at pure infantry guard tactics and how they have changed from 8th edition to the new 9th edition Codex. Now, pure infantry tactics are a classic of the Imperial Guard. That idea of being able to save wave after wave of men crashing against the heretics, crashing against the Xenos filth, and eventually grinding them down and bringing victory to the Emperor, that is something that a lot of Imperial Guard players really enjoy doing with their armies. In fact, your boy MG is a self-proclaimed infantry commander at heart. I love a good infantry horde. I just think there's something so spectacular about seeing those ranks upon ranks of guardsmen fixing bayonets and charging out across into no man's land, taking the fight to the enemy and smiting them by lasgun and bayonet. However, it's not just the fantastic spectacle on the tabletop that makes pure infantry guard tactics so popular in the community. You see, pure infantry guard tactics actually enjoy a long history of not only being viable, but actually being pretty successful over the course of many editions of Warhammer 40k. If we go all the way back to 5th edition, pure infantry tactics were incredibly effective, having the ability to outflank entire platoons of infantry and endlessly respawning waves of conscripts was very effective and was a great way of playing your Imperial Guard, not only competitively, but also with a lot of flavour. Moving on to the dark days of 6th and 7th edition, many Imperial Guard players were forced to spam 200 plus bodies just to avoid getting tabled in any kind of competitive game. And often pure infantry tactics were the difference between just not even really having a game to at least being able to go down swinging and giving the enemy a bloody nose on the way down. After that, in 8th edition, pure infantry tactics were actually some of the most powerful at the start of the edition. They did receive some nerfs, but they never truly had their legs completely kicked out from under them, and pure infantry guard tactics remained a very viable and staple way of guard commanders to secure victory in Warhammer 8th edition. And finally, moving on to 9th edition, where we are now, whilst we were still using that old codex, you were able to get some pretty good mileage out of your pure infantry tactics. At the start of 9th edition, it very much felt like going back into 7th edition. You needed that many bodies in order to have a dog's chance in hell on the tabletop. And then when you move into mid to late 9th edition, you found that being able to take Cadian White Shield conscripts and being able to spam loads and loads of bodies using those big blocks of infantry was actually a really viable tactic. I actually have a video on this channel where I took 365 Cadian White Shields to a tournament and did pretty well with them. So that is the potted history of pure infantry guard tactics and how they've kind of evolved and waxed and waned over the last few editions, but that's in the past. Now let's take a look at our future. Let's take a look at the new 9th edition Guard Codex and really, how have the infantry tactics evolved with the new book? So over all of those previous editions, the old way of running pure infantry guard really did hinge around a few core concepts. The first one being that boys over toys was king. That meant that the equipment that you gave your soldiers really wasn't that important. The difference between a grenade launcher and a plasma gun was negligible on the battlefield because the role of your army was not to do damage output. The role of your army was to focus on taking primary objectives, to focus on winning the mission. If you got to the end of the game and you had barely killed any of your opponent's force, but you had managed to hold him off and to secure many of the primary objectives on the battlefield, and then you were able to score victory, that was all that mattered. This often led to huge amounts of infantry being fielded. A minimum of 200 bodies is often what you would see, but you would very likely see 250 to 300 infantry being fielded into many pure infantry guard armies. At the end of the day, the core guiding concept, the golden rule was more soldiers was always better than fewer higher quality troops. But that was the old way of doing things, and that is not necessarily the new way of running your pure infantry guard. You see, there have been some fundamental changes that has taken place in the new book. Firstly, for the first time, as far as I can remember, there are no conscripts. There are no white shields. There is no big blocks of cheap infantry anymore. In fact, most of your infantry is actually pretty expensive, more expensive than it's been in a long time. If you go all the way back to early 3rd, 4th, 5th edition codexes, you weren't paying more than 50 to 60 points for an infantry squad. Now you're paying 65 points base. Now, bear in mind, a lot of their equipment does come free, but you're still paying 65 points for a base squad. There are also no special weapons squads and no veterans, which means that the way you're going to spam your special weapons in this new army is going to be different the way you used to do it in the old one. Special weapons squads were always kind of popular because they were just so cheap. You could chuck them into any guard army and they'd always do a little bit of damage. And veterans were also pretty popular in your guard infantry forces because it was essentially like being able to include 3 more squads of infantry. By the end of the old 8th edition book, veterans were pretty cost effective. They were 70 points and they came with a whole bunch of free war gear. However, it's not all doom and gloom. You see, despite the fact that we have lost conscripts, which were pretty much a cornerstone of any competitive Imperial Guard pure infantry army, we have actually gained more troop choices than ever. Now, sadly, Katachans aren't really a factor when it comes to collecting pure infantry armies because they're not very good. But if we take a look at the 3 other data sheets that we've got available, they do give you lots of different choices when it comes to what you can put in your pure infantry guard army. You've got your classic infantry squad with 1 heavy weapon and 1 special weapon. This very much allows you to set up a more of a gun line, a more defensive pure infantry army. Do you need to hold a trench? Do you want to take some ground and be able to dig in with some heavy and special weapons? Then your infantry squad's got you covered. Or do you want a more fast moving with much more firepower, although potentially a little bit more fragile kind of Imperial Guard infantry force? Then you've got the Cadian shock troops. And last but certainly not least, you've got the Death Corps of Krieg. This allows you to build a new kind of guard infantry army, one that is actually pretty durable. I've done a video recently reviewing the Death Corps of Krieg infantry choice, and they really are point for point surprisingly durable in comparison to a lot of your other infantry options. So despite the fact that we have lost several key units for our guard infantry force, we've actually gained some ones. And overall, I would say that pure infantry guard is actually in a really good place because now you have variety, and variety is the spice of life. You can now take a infantry force that you can really tailor the different aspects of it. Like I said, do you want to focus more on defense, on digging in, on long-range firepower? Then you could collect an army that was just all regular infantry squads. Do you want to have something that's a little bit more mobile? Focus on your Cadians. Do you want infantry that for once in your Imperial Guard career aren't just going to die when someone looks at them harshly? Then you should want to be considering those Death Corps of Krieg. Now, you don't have to exclusively stick to one of each of those sort of choices. You could absolutely mix and match them. Perhaps you end up taking 12 infantry squads. Maybe you take 2 or 3 of those as more defensive ones with mortars, something that you can sit on your home field objectives, but that can still contribute to the game. That's where your regular infantry squad comes into the fight. Maybe you want to have a screening line of durable infantry backed up by some Cadian shock troop firepower. That allows you to take a few Death Corps squads and then back them up with some Cadian shock troops. Overall, having more troop choices, whilst they're not coming in these big blocks of 30 infantry, you now have a bit more nuance to the kind of force that you can field. Another big improvement, and I think something that has been severely overlooked by a lot of people in the Guard community, is that the elite choices are now more viable than ever. You see, in the previous book, the elite section was incredibly crowded. The fact that command squads were split off from officers, the fact that some of your officers were in the elite section meant that really it could be very difficult to squeeze in all the elite choices that you really needed. Also, the fact that a lot of your officers were in the elite section meant that finding enough good HQ choices was also kind of difficult. You'd often sit down and put your 3 company commanders in, and then you'd end up taking things that you didn't really want to take. Things like maybe Lord Commissar, or maybe even a Primaris Psyker. But in your 9th edition book, your Scions and also the new Kazakin units are in the elite section. Now that is a straight up upgrade for your Scions, and the reason is they're no longer competing for those incredibly valuable troop slots in your army. It goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, that in your infantry army, the troop slot is the most important one, because that's where you're going to be spamming the most units. And so in the old book, the fact that the Scions took up a troop slot meant that you had to pick between them and your other line infantry. Now, more often than not, most guard players would go, well, I want to get as many infantry as possible into my army, so I'll bin off the Scions and I'll take things like veterans instead. If people did end up taking Scions, they would be little 5-man squads dispersed in their main infantry force. They could drop down and do things like retrieve Natman Dayton. But that little 5-man drop objective squad was taking troops away from the main mass that was needed on the front line. But that is not the case anymore. You can have your cake and eat it. In a single guard brigade detachment, you can easily field 120 line infantry, whatever they may be, Kree, Cadian, regulars, hell, you might be mad and have gone for Catachans. And on top of that, you can field an additional 30 Kazakin and an additional 30 Scions, all in a single detachment. No longer do you need to spam 2 or maybe even 3 battalions to get that sweet 180 infantry. On top of this, commissars and orders for your guard have got a lot more useful. Back in the day, it was basically spam first rank fire, second rank fire, try and fish for as many shots as possible. The enemy can only make so many saves. But now we've got a huge variety of orders, and there's always one that will help you out in a tricky situation. Do you absolutely need to hold this objective? Or are you crossing across some open ground that could result in a lot of casualties? Use the take cover order. Do you need to get somewhere a bit quickly? Then you've got move. Do you want to just make sure that you're hitting the enemy with as much accurate firepower as possible? Maybe they're not an Armor of Contempt army and AP -1 lasguns might actually be pretty helpful. You've got take aim. Or maybe you are facing an Armor of Contempt army and you do need to go back to that tried and tested tactic of just overwhelming them with the number of shots you can pump out. First rank fire, second rank fire is your friend. Likewise, going back to commissars for a moment, they've become a lot more of a utility character. Are you facing off against an army that likes to try and get some sort of pseudo deep strike, turn 1, push up into your face? Well, if you use remain vigilant, that army is going to have a bad time. Are you getting contacted across the line by a fast assault army that's going to reduce your firepower if you fall back? Don't worry about it. You have got get back in the fight on your commissars now. They can get your forces to fall back and shoot. Now, not only are the elite choices having a great time, but also the heavy support section is having a big party as well. You see, there is now much more variety of artillery available to you. Now, I know some people might say, artillery, Mordian Glory, it's not really pure infantry. I know, but artillery really does go hand in hand with the whole vibe of, World War I in space, so I thought I'd mention it. You see, you are no longer reliant upon just your heavy weapon squads to fill out those sections in the brigade. If you are taking one, you now also have access to the Field Ordnance Battery. Now, the Field Ordnance Battery and the Heavy Weapons Squad are both looking like pretty good options in the new Guard book. The reason for this is it's looking like it's going to be very likely that Guard are going to get hit by the indirect fire nerf that a lot of other factions have already been subjected to, which means that your more self-propelled style artillery, like your Manticores and your Wyverns and your Basilisks, they're going to be suffering from -1 to hit and the enemy getting +1 to their save. But your Field Ordnance batteries and your heavy weapon squads can totally get around that buff. You just tell them to take aim with a nearby officer. That way, they're suddenly acting exactly the way they were before the nerf. They're hitting on +1, and they've got an extra AP to their shots. So really, the artillery section's looking very, very nice as well. And so you're not just limited to taking some mortars. Now, mortars are very good, don't get me wrong. And in fact, they're strength 5 now, which makes them even better than they ever have been. But the problem with mortars is that they are really good at killing like light infantry and medium infantry, but anything beyond that, they can still do a bit of work on them, but they're a little bit less viable. But the Field Ordnance Battery actually has some pretty chonky guns on it. If you take a look at that Field Bombast gun, that's actually strength 7, it's AP -2, it does a flat 2 damage. That's actually pretty good. If you give it a take aim, suddenly it's AP -3. That's starting to get past things like Armor of Contempt and stuff. So overall, I think having great variety in your heavy support section means that you're no longer just going to see every Guard army spamming 3 heavy weapon squads with mortars. You now might see someone take a couple of mortar squads and a couple of the Field Ordnance batteries to give them that more flexibility and variety in their fire support section. So broadly speaking, that is what has changed between the old way and the new book. So what is the new way? What are the overarching new concepts and themes that you want to be taking into account when you're putting together your 9th edition Codex Imperial Guard Pure Infantry Army? Well, the first thing to mention is it's no longer a choice between boys over toys. It's now a case of you want to be taking boys and toys in your army. You see, most of your squads now come with essentially free war gear, so there's no point in not just giving them all plasma guns and melter guns, flamers, grenade launchers, just dialing them up, and that means you're getting a lot more firepower in your army. On top of that, Pure Infantry Guard is no longer limited to trying to fish for hits on a ballistic skill of 4+. Thanks to the Take Aim order, you're getting +1 to hit and +1 AP. That +1 to hit puts your army pretty much on just standard 3+ to hit if you're running a lot of infantry. Not only that, but the extra AP means that even your las guns are going to be hitting at AP -1. Now, against armies with Armor Contempt, that's not a big deal, but there are still quite a lot of armies out there that don't have it, and you'll really notice it when you start punching your enemy fire warriors down onto a 5+ save. Likewise, your firepower is also markedly improved by the fact that you've got officer aura abilities now as well. So not only are you getting orders like Take Aim and first rank fire, second rank fire, but you're also getting reroll 1s to hit from being near a senior officer, reroll 1s to wound from being near regimental standard. So your damage output on your standard infantry troopers is actually very impressive. So in addition to the fact that you've just got more war gear and the fact that your shots are going to be hitting better and that you've got more buffs that you can stack onto your infantry, you generally just have a higher quality of standard trooper available to you now. Of course, you can still take things like your just basic infantry squad, but realistically, you're going to want to be focusing on things like your Cadians and your Krieg. Your Krieg are just much tougher, okay? They can just, with a medic, ignore the first failed save. Across an army spamming 12 squads, these things, you are going to get dozens of wounds just discounted over the course of a game. Likewise, they've got inbuilt mini transhuman. In this 9th edition meta that we find ourselves in, where everyone is spamming some kind of special weapon, and I can't remember the last time someone shot a basic bolter at me, having inbuilt mini transhuman essentially doubles the failure rate for a lot of our enemy weapons. And if it's not durability you're after, you want to focus on more just how much damage I can do, then Cadian shot troops have got you covered with the fact that they get exploding 6s to hit with their las guns. So they're hitting on 3s, they're rerolling 1s to hit, they're rerolling 1s to wound, and they're also getting exploding 6s to hit. And on top of that, you can start putting buffs on top of your units like Born Soldiers, and there are many other regimental doctrines as well that really allow you to just get as much juice as possible out of your basic infantry units. In fact, if this is the only thing that you take away from this video, please remember this. Infantry no longer just do the dying, they can also do a lot of killing. They have decent damage output now. Now, their primary focus is still going to be swarming the objectives and overwhelming the enemy with bodies. But now, it's no longer a case of your opponent just getting a free day at the range. He actually is going to take damage from your infantry. Now, that's really important because even if you're not running lots of Deathcore Krieg, you've decided to go down more of the sort of Cadian and traditional infantry squad route, that means that you will have pseudo durability. What is pseudo durability? It's where your units stick around on the tabletop longer because there's less enemies around to kill them. And the reason there's enemies around to kill them is because you've been killing the enemies. So not only can you play the objective game, but you can certainly also play the let's kill the enemy models game as well. However, there is one very important takeaway, which is overall, infantry-focused armies are going to have a lot less bodies in them than they used to. Now, for some players, that's going to be a real disappointment. Many Guard players enjoyed spamming huge amounts of infantry, even if it wasn't the best tactic, even if they were just taking it to the ultimate extreme, spamming 365 conscripts. This idea of just truly having hundreds upon hundreds of models that you can just throw at the enemy, well, that has declined significantly. When I've been putting my infantry armies together, I've been struggling to get above 200 units, 200 models, I should say. I've been using a pure infantry Krieg list that has got less than 200 infantry. This must be the first time in almost half a decade where I haven't been taking 250 plus bodies in any of my infantry squads. In fact, I've been finding when I've been trying to reach that higher level of infantry, I've been making too many sacrifices in other areas. So as crazy as it might sound, we're still taking, 100, 200 bodies, but the days of taking 250 plus infantry units on the battlefield are probably over. Now, like I said, some people are going to be really disappointed about that, but overall, purely from a competitive point of view, it is a big improvement. You're getting the same, if not more damage output, the same, if not more durability, but you're having to field less models. Now, the big thing about that is it means that Pure Infantry Guard is much more viable for the regular player at a tournament or competitive scene. Why is that? Well, firstly, it's a lot less of a barrier to entry. It's still 200 infantry models, right? But it's not 250 to 300 infantry models. And then on top of that, you're going to have some spare special weapons for when the meta shifts slightly. No, it's about 200 bodies, and you just need to spam Melter and Plasma and you'll be fine. So it's a lot less of a barrier for entry. Another advantage of having less models is that there is a lot less moving parts, which means it's much quicker to play and it's much easier to play without making any mistakes. Previously, you would have loads of small unit interactions going on. You'd have 5-man squads, 10-man squads, 1-man officers running around, command squads separate from the officers. There were just so many little complicated moving parts, and it was so easy to miss something. And if you didn't miss something, you would end up using up loads of time at the tournament. If you were on a chess clock, it was very stressful playing Pure Infantry Guard. You constantly had to be on it 110% of the time, and that meant if you were playing a 2-day tournament, by the end of day 1 your brain was absolutely frazzled. But in the new way of playing the Pure Infantry Guard, you've basically got 10-man squads, be they infantry squads or Greek squads or Scions or Kazakin. They're 10-man squads, and you've either got 5-man squads with your officers. That's basically it. So it's a lot less moving parts, and it's a lot less stuff you have to remember. Oh, this officer needs to be in range of the command squad. No, he's in the command squad. He's always in range of it now. So it's a lot easier to play. Honestly, just going off on a tangent here for a second, guys, I've played a lot of battle reports with Pure Infantry Guard, and they often take a very long time just because of how many different moving parts and bodies and models that I have on the battlefield. I've been recording Pure Infantry battle reports recently, and they've been taking no longer than when I use hybrid guard armies. So overall, I can say that Pure Infantry Guard is definitely just faster to play on the tabletop, which is really good for you, and it's pretty good for your opponent as well, because they don't want to be sat there whilst you take up 2 hours out of a 3-hour round in a tournament. So to summarize, the new way of playing Pure Infantry Guard is going to be a case of having boys and toys, but you're going to have less overall bodies. The upshot is that those bodies are higher quality, easier to use, and will actually do damage to the enemy. The downside is that maybe your army will look slightly less epic because you're not going to have as many people on the tabletop. Overall, I would say that Pure Infantry is in a better spot in the 9th edition book than it was in the 8th edition book. And you've got a lot more variety when it comes to picking and playing the army. So previously it was just conscripts. That was it. That was just all you ever heard. Now you can choose between a more defensive, a more durable, a more damage output style, or you can mix and match and take a smorgasbord of all the different units. So overall, I would say the army is probably easier to play, more fun to play, and more powerful, but slightly less epic looking. But those are just my thoughts on Pure Infantry Guard in the new 9th edition book. You let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Have you been able to get any games in with Pure Infantry Guard yet? Have you found that it's felt more powerful, or are you still lamenting the loss of conscripts and those truly huge Imperial Guard infantry armies? Put it down in the comment section. If you've enjoyed today's video, make sure you smash that like button and also subscribe to make sure that you never miss an episode. Now, if you really enjoyed today's video, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. It's thanks to the very generous support of my channel members and my patrons that I'm able to do Mordian Glory full time and put extra effort into every single one of my videos. On top of that, one of the big perks you get from being a channel member or Patreon supporter is access to the Mordian Glory Discord, which is a community with over 700 active members. It is always popping off in the MG Discord. There's always someone to chat to about tactics, hobbying, painting, just everything in general. So if that sounds like a whole heap of fun, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. And I just want to take a moment now and say a big thank you to all of the latest channel members. So a massive thank you to Orange Girls, Dylan Smith, Mike Zisby, James Funchal, Big Lab Rat, Jim Hamilton, Mike, Yin Singh, Radu Iankan, Jeremiah Garish, David Newby, Chris Miles, Adam Kirby Jones, War Machine, Anti-Imperialist, Martin Wright, and Inks. Thank you guys for doing your part. Thank you for becoming channel members. I also want to do a shout out to the latest Patreon support as well. So a massive thank you to Rob, Sam, Brett, Chansey, Benjamin, Justin, Devin, Canadian Goose, Samuel, Jed, David, and Jessica. Thank you guys for your ongoing Patreon support. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a massive thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people that have truly gone beyond the Call of Duty when it comes to supporting the channel. So a massive thank you and an 07 down in the comment section for Bonbon Vert, Phil French, Ross Miller, Tequal, Alex Stengal, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Swordfish Trombone, Diesel Fox, Tom Sutton, and of course, August Varney. Thank you guys for your support. It really does make a huge difference, and it is a big part of how I'm able to do this gig full time now. I hope you've all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.